Where are you? That was the first question God asked humanity after the fall. And it's a strange question, because God already knew the answer. So I ask, because throughout the entire Bible, God keeps doing this. Why are you angry? What do you want me to do for you? Do you love me? When you line these questions up, a pattern emerges. God never asks questions to gain information. He asks questions to expose the human heart. Because human beings can hide from themselves long before they try to hide from God. And the terrifying thing is, these questions are not ancient. They're still aimed at us, at our distractions, our ambition, our anxiety, our self-deception. Let's walk through them. Where are you? Genesis 3 verse 9. Think about how much of human life is spent hiding. Not just lying, hiding. Ever since the garden, people have been covering themselves. Adam hides behind fig leaves. Cain hides behind anger. Saul hides insecurity behind power and image. The Pharisees hide corruption beneath public righteousness. The forms change. The instinct stays the same. Now we hide differently. We maintain carefully managed versions of ourselves. The polished LinkedIn profile, the automatic, "I'm doing well." Most of us are not hiding from strangers. We're hiding from the people who are closest to us and from ourselves. And into all of that, God walks into the garden and asks, "Where are you?" Not because he can't find Adam, because hiding has to end before healing can begin. That's the pattern throughout Scripture. God consistently moves toward people the moment they stop hiding. The tax collector who admits his sin. David finally confessing his guilt. Peter weeping after the denial. God does not meet people through perfected performance. He meets them in truth. But here's what the question in Genesis 3 also reveals. Adam didn't just hide his body. He hid his condition. "I was afraid because I was naked." God asked where he was, and Adam answered with what was happening inside him, which means the real hiding wasn't physical. It was the gap between the person he appeared to be and the person he actually was. That gap is still the most common human experience on earth. But hiding from God is only the first layer. The next question goes deeper. It doesn't ask where Adam is. It asks what happened inside his head. Who told you that you were naked? Genesis 3 verse 11. The serpent's first attack was not physical. It was interpretive. He changed the way Eve saw reality. God had already called creation good, but the serpent introduced another voice, another framework, and suddenly, what they had no longer felt sufficient. That's when shame enters the story. Not because they became self-aware, but because they began seeing themselves through a foreign lens, one built on suspicion, comparison, and lack. God's question cuts to the root. Whose voice gave you those eyes? You know this from your own life. You were reasonably content with your career until a conversation at a reunion made you feel like you were behind. You were at peace with your marriage until a specific comment from your mother planted a doubt that never fully left. And suddenly everything you had felt like not enough. Entire industries are built on this mechanism. The serpent asked, did God really say? And that same question, in 1,000 commercial and cultural forms, is being asked every day. Who told you that you were naked? Is not a question about the garden. It's a question about the specific voices that have been allowed to define what is enough, what is valuable, what counts. And it's asking you to trace them back and interrogate whether they have the authority they assumed. Adam lost himself by trusting the wrong voice. Cain's problem was different, and in some ways closer to home. Where is your brother? Genesis 4 verse 9. Cain says, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? After the murder, Cain stands before God and speaks as though Abel is somebody else's problem. That's the strange thing about the story. Cain never says Abel doesn't exist. He just denies responsibility. Am I my brother's keeper? Is one of the oldest forms of human self-protection, and we still do it constantly. You notice your sibling has become quieter every time the family gets together. You notice your friend is drinking more heavily than before. You see it, you register it, and then you keep moving. Not because you truly don't know, because acknowledging it would require something from you. A difficult conversation, an interruption, responsibility. So we learn how to look directly at people without really seeing them. That's what makes God's question so uncomfortable. Where is your brother? Not, Do brothers exist? Where is he? The question refuses abstraction. It forces Cain to confront the person he has successfully turned invisible. Someone in your life is somewhere right now, and your relationship to that reality is not optional. Then God asks another question. What have you done? Not, what did you mean to do? Because human beings survive by narrating intentions. But God keeps returning to actions. So far, every question has been a diagnosis. Where you've gone, what voice reshaped you, who you stopped seeing. 3 different people, 3 different failures. But then the questions change direction. God stops diagnosing and starts asking about resources. What is in your hand? Exodus 4 verse 2. Moses has just been handed the most impossible assignment in history. Confront the most powerful empire on earth and liberate 3 million enslaved people. And Moses does what most of us do. He lists his inadequacies. He can't speak well. Nobody will believe him. He's the wrong man. And God asks, what is that in your hand? A staff, a shepherd's stick he's carried for 40 years. God says, throw it down. It becomes a snake. Pick it up. It's a staff again. Take it with you. That same staff parts the Red Sea, strikes water from rock, holds Israel's victory in battle when Moses raises it. The power was never in the wood. The staff was the symbol of God's authority working through human weakness. God didn't give Moses new resources for a new assignment. He asked about what was already in Moses' hand and said, this will be enough. And then consider what the 40 years in the wilderness actually were. Moses had once been a prince in Egypt. Now he was a shepherd. By every external measure, his life had regressed. But the desert he had wandered for 40 years was the exact desert he was about to lead 3 million people through. He knew every spring, every passage, every danger. What looked like decline was, in hindsight, the most precise preparation imaginable. What you have been dismissing as ordinary, the experiences that felt like setbacks, the skills that seem irrelevant, the years that felt wasted, may be exactly what's needed for what comes next. The question isn't what you wish you had. It's what you're already holding. But there's a problem with the Moses model. You can pick up your staff. You can go. You can have your greatest day and still end up in a cave. What are you doing here? 1 Kings 19 verses 9 and 13. Elijah has just called fire from heaven. The prophets of Baal are defeated. The nation's spiritual direction has shifted in a single afternoon. Then Jezebel sends a message. You'll be dead by tomorrow. And the man who just called fire from heaven runs into the wilderness, sits under a broom tree, and asks God to take his life. I have had enough, Lord. The greatest achievement of his career followed immediately by total collapse. You probably recognize this pattern, even if your version doesn't involve fire from heaven. What's worth noticing is how God responds. He doesn't send a theological correction. He sends an angel with food and water. Twice, the body gets tended before the soul is addressed. Then Elijah travels 40 days to the mountain of God and hides in a cave. And God asks, what are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah answers, I've been zealous. I've done everything right. I'm the only one left. And now they want to kill me. God responds with wind, earthquake, fire, and then a whisper, and then asks the same question again, word for word. What are you doing here? Because Elijah's answer hasn't changed. None of the spectacle reached the place the wound was. So God doesn't explain the wind or the earthquake. He asks the same question a second time, sends him back out, and quietly tells him something he didn't know. There are 7,000 in Israel who have not bowed to Baal. You are not as alone as you believe. That is the answer to Elijah's actual problem. Not the theology he got wrong, but the isolation he felt. And God addresses it with a fact, not a feeling. What are you doing here? Is the question for anyone who ended up in the cave, after a failure that felt final, or a success that felt empty. Not a condemnation, a reorientation. The cave is not where this ends. The first 5 questions have been about exposure and inventory. Now the questions shift from what you have to what you want. What do you want me to do for you? Mark 10, verse 51. Blind Bartimaeus is sitting by the road. He hears that Jesus is passing. He starts shouting. The crowd tells him to be quiet. He shouts louder. Jesus stops, calls him over, and asks, What do you want me to do for you? The question seems unnecessary. He's blind. The answer is obvious. But it isn't. Because not everyone who is suffering wants to be changed. Some people want the pain managed without their life actually shifting. Change, even toward healing, requires becoming a different person than the one you've been. That's not nothing. Jesus forces Bartimaeus to name it. Out loud. Specifically. Rabbi, I want to see. Think about prayer for a moment. Most of us pray in generalities. Lord, help me. Lord, I need you. Lord, bless my life. These are honest, but they're also vague. And the vagueness serves a function. It protects you from the specific disappointment of a specific unanswered request. If you never named exactly what you wanted, you can't be precisely let down. But Bartimaeus models something different. He goes on record. I want to see is not a general request for mercy. It's a specific declaration of what kind of life he's asking for. And that specificity is itself an act of faith and an act of honesty about what you're actually hoping for, as opposed to what you've settled for. We are now 7 questions into this survey. And at this point, all of the questions have turned the lens inward. Where are you? What voice is shaping you? Who have you stopped seeing? What do you have? What do you want? The next question is the pivot. For the first time, the lens turns outward toward the one asking. Who do you say I am? Matthew 16, verse 15. Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asks first, who do people say the Son of Man is? The disciples give the survey. John the Baptist, Elijah, one of the prophets. Safe answers. Answers that file Jesus into an existing category. Then, but what about you? Who do you say I am? Every other question in this series was asking the human to look at themselves, their hiding, their identity, their obligations, their resources, their desires. This question asks the human to make a verdict about the person standing in front of them. Not what tradition says, not what the crowd says. You specifically today, here's what that question requires. You can only answer it honestly after you've done the work of the previous ones. A person still hiding behind a managed version of themselves cannot give a clear answer, because the answer would just be another performance. A person still living under someone else's definition of who they are cannot give a clear answer, because they don't yet know whose voice to trust. The previous questions were not random. They were preparation for this one. Peter answers, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says flesh and blood didn't reveal this. The Father in heaven did. Which means the right answer to God's question is itself a gift from God. He asks the question. He supplies the capacity to answer it rightly. And then he says, on this confession, I will build my church. The question is still open. Is the axis of everything that comes after. But Peter, who gave the right answer at Caesarea Philippi, denied Jesus 3 times that same night of the arrest. And after the resurrection, Jesus came back to him on a lakeshore after breakfast with the final question. And it's worth asking, after everything, why does Jesus ask this? Do you love me? John 21, verse 15-17. 3 times, once for each denial. There's something in the Greek the English translation loses. In the first 2 questions, Jesus uses agape, the unconditional, all-in kind of love. Peter responds with philo. I love you as a friend. I'm close to you. He won't claim the full thing. Not after what he did. On the 3rd question, Jesus comes down to Peter's word, philius me. And John says Peter was grieved. That's the exact word, because Jesus used the lesser term. Because in the lesser term, Peter heard the full weight of what he had done. Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Not a defense. Not an explanation of how he's been better lately. Just, already know. You know what's true underneath the failure. I'm not hiding anymore. And then Jesus commissions him. Feed my lambs. Tend my sheep. Follow me. What Jesus does in this scene is more precise than it first appears. 3 denials. 3 questions. He doesn't offer general forgiveness for general failure. He goes back to the exact shape of the wound, and he heals it in the exact same shape. Most of us have things we've been forgiven for theologically, in principle, in our heads, but have never been specifically freed from. Not because forgiveness wasn't real, but because we've only ever received it in general terms. God forgives you, which is true, but Jesus here does something different. He names the specific failure in its specific shape and addresses it specifically. 3 times. This is the end point of the entire journey. From hiding in shame, to being found, to having your identity reclaimed, to picking up your staff, to coming out of the cave, to naming what you actually want, to making the confession of who He is, to this, being restored not in spite of the specific failure but through it, in exactly the place where it happened. Here's what connects all 8 of these questions. Not one of them was asked because God needed the information. He knew where Adam was. He knew who told Eve she was naked. He knew where Abel's blood had fallen. He knew what Elijah was doing in the cave. He knew what Bartimaeus wanted. He knew who Peter said he was. He knew whether Peter loved him. Every question was asked for the benefit of the person being asked, because something in us requires the truth to be spoken out loud before it can change anything. As long as the hiding is unnamed, the shame untraced, the person invisible, the desire unspoken, and the journey these questions map is not random. It moves in a direction you cannot honestly answer, "Who do you say I am?" until you've stopped hiding. You cannot stop hiding until you've traced the voices that made you afraid of being seen. You cannot answer, "What do you want?" until you've stopped protecting the desire from disappointment. Each question assumes the previous one has been wrestled with, not resolved, but faced. The modern forms of avoidance have never been more sophisticated. More ways to stay distracted, stay busy, stay numb, stay comfortable. But the questions haven't changed. They're still in the room. Where are you? Not where do you appear to be. Where are you actually behind the version you present? Who told you that you were naked? Name the voice. Does it have the authority it claimed? Where's your brother? Who in your life are you close enough to see and have chosen not to see? What is in your hand? What have you dismissed as ordinary that may be exactly what's needed? What are you doing here? The cave is real, but is it where this ends? What do you want? Name it, out loud, specifically. Who do you say I am? Not the crowd's answer. Yours. Do you love me? In the exact place where you failed. Is He asking you there? We are not confused about the answers. That's the uncomfortable truth. And the whole of Scripture keeps showing the same thing. The moment a person stops hiding and answers honestly, the one who asked the question is already moving toward them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65, verse 24. If this spoke to you, stay with it. Subscribe to the Hidden Manna. There's more, and God bless you.